Going. We are going. Max, if you're ready, I'm going to just a real quick intro.
I think so.
You're a longtime SABR member. Like, in how long have you been a member?
20 years.
20 years. I got you beat by 3. Wow, I thought you were longer than I was. Jeez. Longtime SABR member, longtime friend of the Ken Keltner chapter. I first met Max in Milwaukee at SABR 31, and he was a finalist in the trivia contest, along with Bill James, who lost to what was Flato? A guy who beat Bill James and Max, and it was
Scott Flato.
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember that? That was actually my first convention.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't a fist fight, because you would have been knocked out. I'll tell you, he was amazing. Scott Lytle was amazing.
Yeah, it was.
And the story that I remember was the qualifying round was a Thursday night, and there were 3 of us tied with 20 points apiece, which was good for 8th place. The first 9 advanced to the next round. And I only got there because I guessed on one of the questions. One of the questions was, who has the most aggregate home runs on the Washington Senators from 1901 to 1919? And I guessed Walter Johnson, which turned out to be right.
Wow.
And so it was R.J. Lesh and a third fellow whose name I don't remember, and myself, and 2 of us got to advance to the next round. And the reason I don't remember the third fellow's name is because he never showed up. So RJ and I were acclaimed. And everybody was talking about Scott Flato, Dave Zeman, and Bill James are going to win.
Yeah.
Well, people were right about 2 of them. Flato and James made it. And I think I was surprised as anybody to see the scoreboard for that round, and my name was ahead of Zeman's. And well, here I am going up against, I'm reminded of the old story of Groucho Marx playing golf. He was a terrible golf player, and one game he hits a home run, or hits a hole-in-one rather. And there's a big headline on the headline of the Boston Globe. Groucho joins the Immortals. He's got Sam Steed on one side and Ben Hogan on the other. Next day, same hole, he gets it in on his 22nd shot. Groucho leaves the Immortals. And that's sort of what happened in that trivia con. That we get to the finals with Flato and James, and I rang the buzzer once, and the question was something about a switch hitter on the Dodgers, and I guessed Jim Gilliam, which turned out to be wrong. And then Bill James guessed Maury Wills, which turned out to be right. And I knew it was Maury Wills. I was just so surprised that I buzzed in first. And I just said the first name that was on my mind.
Well, Flato was buzzing in really fast.
Flato was buzzing. Sorry.
Yeah. And then he cleaned up when he had the bonus questions that came up on that. And I still talk about that convention. They showed a picture of a Detroit Tiger, and I don't remember all the questions. They had a picture on the screen of a Detroit Tiger pitcher. And all the questions were around him. And I'm making up the questions. But like in 1919, he finished 3rd in the American League in wins. Who was 1 and 2? They went through this whole series of questions. I never did learn the name of that pitcher. I have no idea who they were talking about. But all the questions were around him. So, yeah.
I remember when it was one where they asked something like who played third base in 4 games for the Cubs in 1913, and he buzzed right in.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, it really was. So Max is here to talk about a book that he edited with Bill Nolan called The Time for Expansion. That was published in 2018.
That's correct.
And it's an anthology of all the 14 expansion teams since the expansion era and the players. I know a number of people I think were on here. I know I got a few people asking to join the meeting because they've written for some of the books, and knowing the ins and outs of what goes behind putting our bio project books together was fascinating. That's how I felt as well. So that's what Max here to talk about. But before we do that, a couple of questions just to get to know Max a little bit. I'm kind of following the Rob Nyer questions list. I really like his questions on his podcast. And Max, the first question is, can you tell us about your earliest baseball memory?
Oh, my earliest baseball memory, probably in preschool when I'd ride to nursery school and back, and I kept hearing this name Fernando on the radio, Fernando something, and I kept thinking, who's Fernando? And I had no idea it was Fernando Valenzuela, the ball player for the pitcher for the Dodgers. So without even knowing it, that was probably my earliest baseball memory, just hearing this great phenomenon, Fernando.
Could be a whole lot worse. And, you know, there's a number of us, I'm one of those who believes that our love of the game of baseball was developed by the time we were age 12. And I'm still a 12-year-old at heart when it comes to baseball. So who was your favorite team when you were 12 and or ball player?
Well, my favorite ball player was someone who died long before I was 12, someone who died long before I was born, and that was Roberto Clemente. He was the player that I admired from just because of what a good person he was and what a talent he was on the field. In terms of the guys that I saw play, the team that I followed the most was probably the Montreal Expos. I grew up in Ottawa, and it was so close to where I lived that it was a 2-hour drive, and we'd go to an Expo game or two every year. And one year I remember the Expos came to Ottawa for their winter caravan, and they were skating on the Rideau Canal and playing hockey. And Tom Foley was there. He says, "What am I doing? I'm a Georgia boy." And then you had Rex Hudler, who was there. He was from Arizona. His skating was in the same league as Foley's. And then you had Brian Holman, who was from Denver. He was a natural on ice. And pardon me. So the Expos were probably the team that was my favorite, but the team that really got me interested in baseball, believe it or not, was the New York Yankees. As we would go down to Florida during spring break, and my aunt and uncle had a condominium in Plantation, Florida, which was about 20 minutes west of Fort Lauderdale. And that was right when the Yankees were having their spring training games. And so we'd go to spring training. It was like a different world. It was, you were right on it. You go to a major league game and you're a little dot up in the stands, but you go to a spring training game, you're right on top of the players. And it's a very different culture. I mean, in terms of the interaction and the autographs and so forth. And I think that experience is what cemented my interest in baseball, which was different from most kids my age. I mean, most Canadian kids at that time did follow baseball, provided it wasn't the hockey season. But I would follow baseball all year round.
Well, we do think you're a little different at times, Max. You're probably one of the few up there that will say that and get away with it. It's like me coming from Wisconsin saying I hate football. I got to be careful how and where I say that. So, sorry, Bob. So tell us about the making of Time for Expansion.
Well, that's what I'm here. That's why I'm here tonight.
Yeah. It's all yours.
All right, everybody, pull up a chair because it's time to say those magic words. It's time for expansion baseball. And tonight I'm going to be talking about the making of the book. I've actually written 2 chapters in the book. I wrote the lead essay, which I'm going to be talking about a little bit tonight, and I wrote one of the formation essays as well. I'm going to be talking about the breakdown of the different chapters, but what I'm going to be talking about tonight is the making of the book. And it's a story which began in October of 2016. And at a time that the Chicago Cubs were gearing towards their first World Series championship in 108 years, the saddest of possible words became Osterer to Ben Murgy to Cates. Allow me to explain. Irving Osterer was the editor of a bulletin of a synagogue in Ottawa. And he published an essay that I had written. One of the people who read the paper was a congregant, a fellow by the name of Joe Ben Murgy. Joe's wife was a friend of my mother's. He shows it to my mother. He shows it to his wife. His wife shows it to my mother. My mother sends it to me, and I said, "When did I write this?" And what it was an article about the only baseball team in history to wear an Israeli flag on their uniform. And that team was the 2003 Houston Astros. And the reason they wore an Israeli flag on their uniform is to commemorate the 7 astronauts who were killed in the space shuttle Columbia. One of which was Ilan Ramon, who was the first Israeli in space. And they wore the patch for that particular mission. And one of those, it was the name of all the astronauts. And besides Ramon's name was an Israeli flag. Now, 2 years prior, I had met a lot of the members of the SABR chapter in Houston at the convention there. And one of those people who's here tonight is not actually here, Jim Kreutz. Hey, Jim, where? Oh, there you are. You came back just in time. I was just about to talk about you.
My ears were ringing.
Your ears were ringing. Great. So what happened is Jim was one of the people who responded when I sent out that essay about the baseball uniform with the Israeli flag. And Jim writes me back and says, if you ever want to speak at a SABR meeting in Houston, the door's wide open. What Jim doesn't realize is that when people make those overtures to me, I usually take them up on it. And so that was October. The following February, I went to Houston and spoke at a regional meeting there on a topic called Biographing the Miracle Mets. It was 3 essays I had written about the 69 Mets for that SABR Bio project and the research methods that I took. A few months later, there's another invitation to come back to Houston. Well, what am I going to talk about now? Anyways, Greg Lucas, who's a former broadcaster for the Astros and who's a member of that chapter, gave me the idea to talk about a subject encompassing the 2 cities. I'm thinking, what could that be? I've already written about Alan Ashby. I mean, he played and broadcast for both the Blue Jays and the Astros. And then I thought about a statistical analysis on the most successful expansion draft. And I mentioned this to Bill Nowlin, and Bill Nowlin said, sounds like it could be a good idea for a bio project. I'm thinking, okay. And he says, which you're going to be editing with me. I'm going, right. So fast forward to June now, the SABR convention's in New York, and Bill and Gene Ardell and I had a meeting in the vendor's room about how this project's going to take place. Bill has the idea. Bill has the idea that for all 14 teams, we're going to include 4 essays. We're going to include 1 on the formation of the team and 3 biographies. That's 42 players. That's about a spring training roster. And so I'm going to be talking about the player biographies first. Bill had one criteria for including the players, and I had another criteria. Bill wanted to include players as many new biographies as possible. Biographies that hadn't been printed in one of the other bio projects. When I gave this presentation before, I gave a brief explanation about what a bio project encompasses. We talked about the 82 brewers at this meeting, so I presume everybody's familiar with the concept. And so he had that criteria, and I had a bit of a different criteria. I wanted to select as many players whose photos we could get for free. Now, I knew that we were working on a photo budget of $1,000. For those of you who have the book, there's tons of pictures in here. We got all those pictures for $1,000 or less. Just as an aside to show how long I've known Bill Nowlin, this is a book that Bill co-wrote with Johnny Pesky. It's called Mr. Red Sox. And I'll read you the inscription. He writes, to Maxwell, maybe this will be the year. Bill Nowlin, 2004. Not a bad year for the Red Sox. And so we were lucky with the photographs. I knew somebody in Detroit by the name of Dwayne LeBacus. Dwayne owns the rights to many of the McCarthy photos. Any of you familiar with McCarthy photos? You've probably seen them. They're pictures of players from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Many of them are post shots at Tiger Stadium, and others are post shots in spring training. Anyways, this fellow owned the rights to a whole catalog of them. And years before, Bill Nowlin and I and Dwayne had reached an agreement that any SABR publication could use these photos for free, provided he gets copies of the publication. And so we were able to get a lot of photos of the players from Dwayne. Now, in terms of what players we were going to include, it was a bit of an expansion draft type process. We wanted to include players who hadn't been written about before, whose photos we could get for free, but who would be interesting for people to read. So a few of the repeat biographies we included were players like Maury Wills, Gil Hodges. We included the 2 Hall of Famers who've been selected in expansion drafts. Those are Hoyt Wilhelm and Trevor Hoffman, former Brewer. We included some players who were just interesting players to read about. One was Mac Jones, who was a former Milwaukee Brave, and when he played for the Montreal Expos, he hit the first home run on Canadian soil, which made him the mayor of Jonesville. Another one, Nate Colbert. Nate Colbert was from St. Louis, Missouri, and when he was 8 years old, he went to a Cardinals game where Stan Musial hit 5 home runs in a doubleheader. And upon leaving the game, Colbert was overheard to have said, "I don't think anybody else is going to do that. Certainly not me." Wrong. Because in 1972 in Atlanta, when he was a member of the San Diego Padres, the only other player in baseball history to hit 5 home runs in a doubleheader was Nate Colbert. We included a name that Brewer fans are quite familiar with. Not only was he a Cy Young Award winner, but he also played in the movie Major League, and that's Pete Vukovich. Whatever photos we couldn't get from Dwayne, we got most of the photos from the Hall of Fame for the players. There was one guy we couldn't get, and that was Corey Lytle. Corey Lytle, we included him for a few reasons. He was selected by the Arizona Diamondbacks. First of all, he was a direct descendant of Robert Fulton, the inventor of the steam engine. He had been a replacement player in the 1994-95 strike. And what he's perhaps most famous for was the circumstances of his unfortunate demise. He flew a small aircraft into a building in New York. We couldn't get his picture anywhere. We tried his former teams. We tried the Hall of Fame. Finally, Bill came up with a picture of him giving up a home run in the Metrodome from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. And he was making this horrible-looking face like this, and his face was just turned his back to the camera. It was dark. It was like a green Christmas tree at night. He was wearing a green Oakland A's uniform, going, "I don't want this picture." Finally, I got in touch with his charitable foundation. And the man at the other end of the phone, it turned out to be Kevin Lytle, Corey's twin brother. And I said, "All these pictures that you have on the website, can we use one of them for the book?" He said, "Sure." I said, "Where did you get them from?" He said, "Oh, we just copied them off the internet." Gee, thanks a lot. And then I saw one picture of Corey and Kevin when they were kids. And I said, "I don't think that one was owned by a major league team. Who owns the rights to that picture?" He says, "Well, our grandmother took that picture. You can probably have it." I said, "Is it a high-resolution graphic?" He goes, "What's that?" I said, "Forget this." How did we resolve the Corey Lytle photo situation? Bill Nowlin gets in touch with Topps. And he said, can we have the rights to use one of his baseball cards? They said, yes, but because he's dead, we want you to buy 3 other images. So it was a small price to pay, but we finally got our Lytle. And then with the formation essays, it was a different essay for each team. I wrote the essay on the Blue Jays. And that was a fun experience. I got to interview a lot of people that way. I got to interview Pat Gillick and Peter Bavasi, who was the general manager in the early years, Lou Cause, who was a journalist, Elliot Wally, who worked in the front office. And most of the essays that we didn't have much of a problem getting people to write for. Then there was the Expos essay. Norm King was originally supposed to write that. Some of you must know Norm from the conventions. Norm wrote a book about the Expos and was in the process of writing another book about the Expos when he took on this assignment. Unfortunately, Norm was diagnosed with cancer. It was a diagnosis which proved to be fatal. So he was too ill to write the paper. We found 2 other people, and both of them backed out. It was March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. And I'm looking through some of my books, and I see one written by Danny Gallagher of the Renfrew, Ontario Gallagher family. He had written in one of the books on the Expos a formation essay about the Expos. I went on the SABR website. Is Danny a SABR member? Danny's a SABR member. So I got in touch with Danny. Can we use this? He said, sure. There's the Expos essay. So, and then with the player essays, we had a few issues as well. We had originally wanted to do Bobby Abreu for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. It was somebody in Venezuela who had to back out of the project because he didn't have any internet because of the rationing under Hugo Chavez. So instead, we had to find somebody to do Dennis Springer at the last minute. And then we had another problem, and this was my fault. Bill had written Ken Aspromonte as part of the Los Angeles Angels. And then I discovered, wait a minute, Ken Aspromonte was not selected by the Los Angeles Angels in the expansion draft. He was selected by the Washington Senators and traded to the Angels. So we had 4 Senators and only 2 Angels. How do we fix that problem? So Bill wasn't too happy about that, and he let me know, but we ended up finding somebody to write about Johnny James, who was a Yankees prospect who had been selected by the Angels. One of the biggest challenges of the book was getting the rights to photos for the formation essays. Bill wanted 5 photos per team, if we could do that. And some of the teams were great. Within sending out an overture for pictures, within 1 day, we got a response from David Eskenazi. I don't know if anybody knows that name. David lives in Seattle, and he's a historian of baseball in Seattle. And he says, I have a website. Any of the Pilots photos you want, you can use. Now, you're not going to have as good luck with the Mariners because the Mariners are a little tougher with that, but you can have all the Pilots photos. We had really good luck with the Royals. We had really good luck with Houston. We had exceptionally good luck with. Mike Acosta sent us a ton of pictures, so many that we ended up having a 2-page double spread of the Colt 45s in their first spring training. We would have done the same with the Marlins. The Marlins sent us a ton of photos too. Unfortunately, they sent them to us about a week before the deadline. So we didn't have the time to do that, to organize that. We had, with the Expos, we had good luck. We thought we were going to have bad luck with the Expos. But, I mean, what happened? The Expos, most of those photos were owned, the rights were owned by a fellow named Denny Brodeur, who was the Expos team photographer the whole time. And I had heard that if people wanted the rights to those photos, it was $250 each. Mr. Brodeur passed away, I believe, in 2013, and he lent his entire collection, or bequested his entire collection, to the McCord Museum in Montreal. And I got in touch with them. Can we use some photos for the book? They said, yeah, use whatever you want. A few teams we had trouble with. The Blue Jays we had trouble with. Other projects where the Blue Jays have been involved, people have gotten in touch with the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, they were renovating at the time, and there was, all the pictures were in boxes somewhere, so they didn't have access to them. Washington Senators, another interesting one. Who owns the rights to Washington Senators pictures? My conventional thought would have been the Texas Rangers. I suggest to Bill, didn't John Blake, who's the public relations guy for the Texas Rangers, used to work for the Red Sox? Do you know him? And he says to me, are you kidding? The Rangers are playing the Red Sox at Fenway Park right now. John Blake is standing 50 yards away from me in the press box. He goes and talks to John. Sorry, we threw away the Washington Senators pictures years ago. So how are we going to get our pictures? We're not going to get them from the Washington Post. That costs money. We're not going to get them from the Associated Press or the United Press. There's a wonderful coffee table book. I think it's called Washington Senators in Black and White. We got in touch with the author. He wasn't going to help us. We found, somebody said, I've got all these J Publishing photographs. I said, they went out of business in 1965. I don't know who owns the rights. And then I had a brainwave. Washington, home of the president. Who was the president when the Washington Senators were an expansion team? John F. Kennedy. I got in touch with the John F. Kennedy Library. Do you have any baseball pictures of the president? Tons. I went on their website. And there must have been dozens of baseball pictures of JFK at Senators games. I said, how much for the rights to these pictures? I said, $26 each. I got in touch with Bill. Can I buy 5 pictures from the Kennedy Library? He says, I'll let you have 3. Done. So we've talked about the pictures for the formation essays. We've talked about the pictures for the biographies. Some other issues we had. Normally we have a copy editor and a graphic designer who looks at the book before it gets published. Well, the copy editor that SABR usually used had left the position just before. We were able to find Rachel Sullivan in Boston who was able to do it, and I think she did a nice job. As it got closer, word circulated that Canada was having an impending postal strike. While that wasn't going to affect the book launch was scheduled for Houston on November the 12th. If I didn't get my money to SABR, the books wouldn't be paid for. Fortunately, I was able to get the check in before the strike began. And while they were able to deliver the books to Houston, I was also scheduled to do a book signing in London, Ontario the week before, and that didn't happen. We had the book signing with the book launch in Houston, and there's a couple reasons we had it there. First of all, we had 23 people from Houston contribute to the book, including people from the Pecan Park Eagle, SABR, Tal Smith Enterprises, and the Astros. Now we were at the time I was writing for the Pecan Park Eagle, and as part of the festivities, we had an expansion panel, which turned out to be a Colt 45s panel. We had Larry Durker, we had Bob Aspromonte, we had Tal Smith, and we wanted to get Jimmy Wynn. Jimmy wasn't able to come that night, so we got Bill McCurdy to do it instead. Bill McCurdy had been Jimmy Wynn's biographer. He was also the editor of the Pecan Park Eagle. And that was where I'd learned that I had been saying it wrong all these years. I learned how to speak English, which was one of 2 things that I didn't think would ever happen in Texas. And the other thing that happened that night, which I never thought would happen there, was I saw snow. It snowed that night. And so that was more or less the making of the book. Then about 2 months later, I got an interesting piece of mail from Los Angeles. One of the things I didn't talk about is how we got the name Time for Expansion Baseball and why I'm wearing the shirt that I'm wearing. one of the things growing up that I always liked to do was watch the Dodgers because of Vince Scully's broadcasts. And we were lucky enough if the Dodgers were making an East Coast road trip that the games would be on early enough. And I used to study Vince Scully. I used to watch what he was doing, because at that time I wanted to be a broadcaster. In my own career, I got as far as St. Catharines, Ontario, and that was it. And so one of my author copies I mailed to Vince Scully in Los Angeles, and I wrote him a little note telling him what an inspiration he was. And that's why the name of the book, Time for Expansion Baseball, was a play on his time for Dodger baseball. And of course, when the Dodgers moved west, that was the impetus for expansion. 2 months later, I get a letter in the mail from Los Angeles. Hi, Maxwell. Thank you for your wonderful book, which I will read with great delight, and for all the thoughtful good wishes from my birthday to a Happy New Year, and the same to you, Vin.
First name basis there, Max. Wow.
So I didn't write the book with the intention of connecting with Vin Scully over it, but that was the end result. And before we go to questions, I'm going to talk a bit about the essay that I wrote about the expansion drafts. And this is going to be the interactive part of the presentation. I wrote about answering the question, what was the most successful expansion draft? And I was basing it on 3 metrics. One was how long the players remained with the team. 2 was how well the team played. And 3 was the wins above replacement for the players. And when I say the players, I mean the 30 selected in each expansion draft and the players that were generated by those 30 in trades. Now, does anybody want to guess? You might want to turn your microphones on. Does anybody want to guess who finished first?
The Vegas Golden Knights.
Right answer, wrong sport.
Oh, well.
I actually talk about the Vegas Golden Knights in the introduction as one of 2 teams in hockey to reach the Stanley Cup their very first year. Anyone want to guess who finished first?
Was it the Royals?
Circle gets the square, the Kansas City Royals. Nobody else was close. I mean, Kansas City reached their first winning season in their 3rd year. They were 85 and 76 in 1971. 76, 77, and 78, they won their division title each year. 77, they actually had a better record than the Yankees. And the expansion players generated some very good players who remained with the team as late as 1987 when Hal McRae retired. Now, does anybody want to guess where the Milwaukee Brewers franchise fits into the picture?
Oh, it's the Pilots.
One of the worst. They took over that team pretty fast by the time they came to Milwaukee.
It's in the middle.
Anybody else want to guess?
Forward.
Milwaukee Brewers, when I combine all the different metrics, actually finished 3rd. Even though they inherited one of the most pathetic teams in the history of baseball, the Seattle Pilots, at the end of the 1970 season, they hired Frank Lane to be their general manager. And Lane made some trades which paid dividends for them for years to come.
Trader Lane.
There was the George Scott trade where they got
Colbert.
first big superstar from the Boston Red Sox. They had some spare parts from that trade. They had Jim Lonborg and Ken Brett. They were traded to Philadelphia for Don Money, who remained with the team for years. And then they traded George Scott back to the Red Sox and got Cecil Cooper out of the deal. And then some of the other players they got in trades, John Briggs was another one who put up some big years for the Brewers. Jim Colbert, who was their first 20-game winner. And although it wasn't apparent right away, combined with all the players that they drafted on an amateur level, I mean, who has Yount and Molitor as number 1 picks within a 5-year period? And then bringing over George Bamberger from the Orioles and bringing the Orioles' way of running a team. Between 1978 and 1983, The Brewers were the best team in the American League with the possible exception of the Baltimore Orioles. And that's about all. Do we have any questions? Bill, you have a question? Hi, Bill.
Just saying hello.
Oh,
Very
hi,
nice
Bill. How you
presentation.
doing?
Pretty good. That was a very
Lord.
interesting presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Max is as a writer in 3 of the books, and making sure that the editors had work to do when I was writing. I'm surprised you didn't talk about any of the editing of the essays and all, because I know that I've been beaten up pretty bad in some of my essays. So were they better writers than me, or wasn't that?
Well,
Sure.
There were some boxing gloves brought out on both sides. I like to think of SABR as an organization of friends, and so I didn't really want to bring up didn't really want to bring up those issues, because I know sometimes when people edit papers and they don't like what the editor has to say, there's feelings that are hurt and so forth. And I thought about including that in the presentation, but I decided to leave that at the door.
Okay. I learned a lot, thankfully, for the editors. When I say beat me up, they had a good and legitimate reason for doing so, and I'm still trying to learn how to write. That accounting degree hasn't taught me much about English. So,
Anybody else?
Max, I enjoyed the biography of Gil Hodges. He's my favorite old-time player. Was there already a bio in SABR before this book? Because I was surprised that it would wait until it would be this recent.
Hodges was one of the players that we used that had been published elsewhere. There was
Okay.
a book on the 1947 Brooklyn Dodgers that Lytle Spatz did not edit that one. The name escapes me at the moment, but Gil Hodges was included in that one, and that was one of the ones that of a previously published biography that Bill Nowlin gave me permission to use. I figured Hodges is going to be an anchor in this book. He's got a lot of fans. A lot of people are asking why he's not in the Hall of Fame. And I think by including Gil Hodges in the chapter on the Mets, people would buy the book perhaps who wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great.
Maxwell,
Max,
did you enjoy the
okay.
book signings?
Pardon me?
Did you enjoy the book signings?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. It was being able to interact with the people who bought the books, and you try and talk to them a little bit, and when as time permitted I would ask them what their favorite team was, and I would try to do an inscription that befit the team. So if somebody said Blue Jays, I'd say, what do you want? Let's play ball, from the song. Or if somebody said Astros, I'd say, makes a fellow proud to be an Astro. And if somebody said Expos, I'd say Valderie Valdera, and on it went from there.
Max, do you know?
I saw somebody else. Oh, Bob.
Yeah, hey Max, I didn't know if I'd be able to get it, so I typed it in. But I remember the the Seattle expansion when I was a kid, and it seems like the rules changed over time. And it seems like I didn't look them up. It seems like it was harder back in the olden days when they expanded. They really crippled you. You really got the cast-offs, and it got a little easier by the time you got up to Colorado and Florida. Is that true? Did you notice anything like that?
Absolutely, it's true. I
Okay.
mean, in the early years, they wanted to protect all their better players. And
Yeah, you really got cast-offs back then.
You did. And as I said when I did this presentation another time, one of the surprises, when you look at players who were left unprotected, I mean, the only players that you could select were the ones who were left unprotected. And you protected 15 players, and then every time you had a player selected, you got to protect 3 more. Well, 1968, the Baltimore Orioles did not protect Jim Palmer, and neither the Pilots nor the Royals wanted him. He'd been injured all year. And then by the time you got to Colorado and Florida, you're right, it got considerably easier. They had free agency then, so it was easier to.
Yeah, I think
select
that's a big
players
deal
that
too,
way.
right? You don't have to build through the draft necessarily. You draft your starting roster, and then you go into free agency with a pile of money, and you can kind of build a team you have advantage over the Royals and the Pilots. What if Palmer had been a Pilot? That would have changed Brewer history forever.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know
Fine,
that.
you given the way the Pilots and their mentality was, they probably would have
Yeah.
traded right back to the Orioles for a bag of beans.
A bag of balls. Yeah, that's right.
And so the other thing about the Rockies and the Marlins, and then the Diamondbacks and the Devil Rays, is that the earlier expansion teams didn't have the same capital those teams did. Don't forget, the fee for an expansion franchise rose rapidly. In 1977, the fee was, I think, $14 million. By 1998, it had increased tenfold to 140 million. And so there was a lot more money available for player development by the time the more recent expansion franchises came around. The other story like that was in 1992, the Yankees left a little-known relief pitcher from Panama unprotected. The Rockies and the Marlins didn't take him, and that was Mariano Rivera.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Must be 100 stories like that. Those are great.
Thanks.
And you can
But yeah,
fantasize. It would have changed Brewer history forever.
It became easier with the passage of time
Yeah.
for expansion teams to build upon themselves.
Great. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else?
Biggie,
Max, I know you mentioned the photos as being the hardest challenge. Was there any other big challenges or any point at which you thought, oh my God, this book isn't going to get done? Or was it simply the photos?
Well, there were all sorts of challenges all the way along. And every time it happened, I kept saying to Bill, I bought this plane ticket for Houston months ago. November 12th, when this has to be done. Is that going to be a problem? And every time he would assure me, no, it's not. If we're going to get this done in time for your plane ticket and your presentation. And I finally saw the book on November 11th, the day before. Mark Wernick, who's a very good friend of mine who lives in Houston, he and I and his wife Luba spent the day together, and he brought me the book. And sorry I didn't bring it. There's a picture of me in the lobby of the hotel where I was staying in Houston wearing my Astros hat and my Astros jacket with the book right in front of me.
Wow.
Bob Began, do you have a question?
Mike.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the music of Dan Byrne?
Yes.
You were talking about Vin Scully. I happen to think of that one song of his. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Dan Byrne.
Do you know his song about Vin Scully?
No, I didn't know he wrote a song about Vin Scully.
If I can find it, I'll send it to you.
Thank you, Bob. But talking about Dan Byrne, he did write a baseball song about the perfect game that wasn't, pitched by Armando Galarraga.
Yes. Yep.
I think it's called Joyce and Galarraga was the name of the song.
Yep. Joyce and Galarraga.
Joyce and Galarraga, perfect game. No!
I'll find the song. I'll send it to you.
All right, thank you.
Maxwell, why don't you tell everyone the story about your fellow Houston chapter member that played high school ball with Vin Scully?
Oh, the birthday boy.
Yes.
Larry Miggins. Larry Miggins was one of the people I met at the SABR convention in Houston. He played third base and outfield. Larry Miggins, as I mentioned before, is celebrating a birthday today. He's 95 years old.
Oh, wow.
Larry is the father of 12 children. Larry and his wife, Kathleen. Kathleen Miggins is from Ireland. Larry's parents were from Ireland. Larry was born in New York. He played for the St. Louis Cardinals for a couple seasons, and when their farm team was in Houston, he settled there and has remained there his entire life since. But Larry Miggins grew up in the Bronx. And as Jim had mentioned, Larry played high school baseball with Vin Scully. And when I was at the convention in Houston, he and I talked about that. I'm afraid I don't remember what he said. I should, but...
Do you want me to finish the story?
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So before one of the games, Larry said, you know, Vin, I'm going to be a Major League Baseball player. And Scully turned to him and said, well, that's funny. I'm going to be a Major League Baseball broadcaster. And Larry said, well, that's neat. Maybe we'll do a game together. Vin said, I'll do you one better. I'll call your first Major League home run. And in 1952, Larry got a rare start. It was the baseball game of the week. And who was the broadcaster?
No way.
Yeah. And who hit his first home run that day?
Nice.
He did tell that story. Thank you.
That is
Sorry.
special. Max, I have a question for you. Since you
Go ahead.
did a book on past expansions, how do you feel about the proposal to expand to 32 teams?
Oh, I think I may crucify myself by saying this. I think there are too many teams to begin with. We know the contraction didn't work. They tried to contract 2 franchises in 2001. They never said which teams they were, but it was an open secret. It was the Twins and the Expos. That didn't go over very well at all. The players were going to go on strike over the issue in 2002. So there's not going to be any contraction. I think the game's watered down as it is. I think there are too many players, too many injuries. Players are rushed to the major leagues too soon, and not enough talent. But if there are 2 expansion teams, think of the money Major League Baseball would make.
That's it. There's a lot of money there, and it clears up the schedule. They don't have to worry about interleague game every day.
Well, they'll probably have interleague games every day anyway, because in their Major League Baseball economics, interleague play makes more money than intraleague play.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it may happen. I think you talk about franchises moving. I don't see anybody moving. The one team that seems to be most in danger is Tampa Bay. Yeah. And they're locked into that stadium lease until the end of 2027. So they're not moving anytime soon.
Not anytime soon.
In terms of candidates for expansion teams, I keep hearing about Nashville. That Dan Duquette, who had been the general manager of the Expos, has gone down to Nashville to try and drive support for a major league team there. People keep talking about Montreal. I'd like to see it happen. I think it might be a mistake, though. A lot of the issues that Montreal had, why they lost the Expos, those issues are still there. In terms of the geography of the city, there's no place for them to play. Olympic Stadium was derelict the second year it was open. All the land alongside the metro in Montreal has been occupied by other uses. There's television. There's the currency issue. There's the national unity issue, taxation. That the players are taxed in. The players on the Blue Jays are taxed in the United States and Canada. The players, when they were on the Expos, were subject to a third tax in Quebec. Now, the foreign tax they could write off against their U.S. tax, but try and explain that to the players and the agents.
Yeah.
So,
Maxwell, you know all this because you're a tax accountant.
That's part of it. But another city I keep hearing them talking about moving is Oakland. But again, they've looked at different possible sites in the Bay Area. San Jose's been rejected because it's too close to San Francisco, and different areas in the different sites in the Oakland area have been rejected.
But they do, I think they do. The city has sort of given, there's like a tentative agreement for a location.
In Oakland.
I mean, the status is in Oakland. Like there is something that hypothetically they'll be moving into in about 4 or 5 years. That's my understanding. That like at the moment, there's not the threat that they're going to leave.
Well, that would be nice if it happens because, I mean, Oakland does have a loyal fan base. They've got a great history.
Yeah.
And it would be a shame to see the team who's already moved twice move a third time.
Yeah. Yeah. In a sense, I think.
Vegas, guys, what do you think? Does Las Vegas get Major League Baseball?
until they got the Golden Knights, I would have said no because of the gambling issue. But look, hockey's there, football's there. The Golden Knights have done very well in their short history. It's to be seen how the Raiders are going to do in Las Vegas. But I think, apart from baseball's archaic attitude towards anything to do with gambling, I think it could work.
Yeah. Max, what do you think? Do you think they'd ever consider a third team in New York? Because demographically, that actually makes the most sense out of any market available. New York area easily could support a third team without without the Yankees or the Mets blinking, really.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. I can remember listening to a study that was done around the time that the Expos moved to Washington. And at that time, the market that was most viable for another team was indeed a third team in New York.
Yeah.
The issue was, if a team comes into that market, they'd have to pay a massive indemnity to the Mets and the Yankees. And so if it's an expansion team, that fee would have to factor into the cost. And if it was purchasing a team in another city, they would have to factor that into the move. I mean,
yeah.
In 1976, the San Francisco Giants nearly moved to Toronto. And one of the sticking points was the lease on Candlestick Park, which had another 18 years on it. To get out of that lease, it was going to cost $5.25 million.
Yeah.
So the purchase price to move the Giants to Toronto would have been $13.25 million. $8 million plus the indemnity fee.
Yeah.
As we know, the Giants stayed in San Francisco. What was the purchase price? $8 million. The Stoneham family got the same money in their pocket whether they moved the team to San Francisco or Toronto.
We are at 7:55.
Good number for Milwaukee.
Yeah, I keep adjusting.
Turns home runs.
Yeah. I mentioned that we do a drawing for the book. And I just threw half the names on the floor as I'm trying to mix this up.
Well, I don't mix them up.
Yeah.
Good
Max
job.
going to do the draw. Oh, never mind. So I'm just going to reach in, grab a name. My name is out of it. Max, you can't win it either. Sorry.
It's all right. I've got a copy.
Yeah, I saw that, so I figured it was safe saying that. And the winner is the last guy to sign in, Jay Jordan.
Well done.
Jay, is your address correct out on the SABR website? Because I'll order it through SABR and mail it to you. Okay.
And I'll send you a book plate and I'll sign it for you.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
You're very welcome, Jay. Congratulations.
Thank you, Maxwell.
We are coming up on the 8 o'clock hour. Does anyone have any other questions for Max? Or would we like to do this at the end of our meetings, Max? I think you remember meetings where we did this. I like to turn it into what I call bar time. Back in the old days when we could actually have a face-to-face meeting, we had our speakers come in and we'd kind of chat about those things. And afterwards, they go to the bar and talk baseball. So I thought maybe we open up to what I'd call bar time and let's go sit at the bar and have a beer. And anyone have anything they want to talk about baseball? We've got we're 20 games into the season. Any comments anybody has on that they'd like to talk about?
Are we going to make it through the season? What are people's impressions?
I think there's too much money to be lost if they don't.
How about thumbs up for those that think we're going to make it through the season? 2, 3, 4, 5.
I don't.
Yeah, we're about half.
Yeah.
It may be more hope than any insider knowledge, though, right? I hope it does.
Oh, hope is yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I think we all hope. I have no
We all hope.
insider knowledge. I fear if we have a couple more teams like the Cardinals and Miami,
Yeah.
they'll just have to shut. You can't have teams who play 6 games out of 20.
Yeah.
We
Well,
just
the
had
Mets
the
today.
Mets. The Mets just tested positive today, so
Did they?
they canceled with the Marlins today and the Yankees
And the
tomorrow.
Yankees.
Wow.
Luckily, they're
bunch
not
of-
canceling against like Philadelphia, St. Louis, or the Marlins already lost so many games.
Right.
Yeah.
Bunch of 7-inning doubleheaders. Let's play 2.
How do you guys feel
4-3.
about the 7-inning doubleheader?
Okay with it.
Any of you guys looked up any old baseball players in Wisconsin?
Well, try that again, Jim. I didn't get the question.
I was just curious if any of the members here have ever looked up, interviewed, or just gone by and spoken baseball with any old ball players in Wisconsin.
Well, at the convention we had that player panel of Milwaukee Braves.
Yep.
Now Bert Thiel, I think, was the only one who was a Wisconsin native.
Yep. I talked to Bert in May.
Bert since passed away, unfortunately.
Passed away, yeah. We got the bio project done Thursday night before the funeral. We got it to the family the night before the funeral. It was ready to go. We just needed Gregory Wolf to do the final reading. And then when we got the news that Bert had passed away, and Rory Calhoun caught it, one of the editors. And so we got that changed quick and got it to the family, and they were very appreciative. So, yeah.
Dennis, did you ever actually talk to Gorman Thomas when you wrote yours?
No, I didn't.
Okay, I was
I
curious.
reached out to him several times, gave him a business card and everything. And I know at the last time I talked to him, he was working on the book with another person. I think he saw me as competition, but his book has never come out. So I'm trying to reach out to him again and say, whatever happened to your book, Gorman? We could, let's do
Yeah.
something. I can write SOB and the F word a lot because
Maybe you had to buy a case of his mustard or something like that, and then you could have got his attention or something. So
I wasn't seeking him out, but I had a brush with greatness way back when I was in the Army down in southern Arizona. There was a minor league team in Tucson, and the Albuquerque Dukes were in town playing, and Mickey Hatcher was coaching first base. And I grew up in Minnesota. I was a Twins fan. That's where Mickey played, if you want to call it the prime of his career, right? People love Mickey Hatcher, and he came over and he talked to me, and he signed a piece of paper for me, and then he ran in, got a pinch single, got replaced for a pinch runner, and came back and talked to me.
that's awesome.
He was on the roster as a player, first base coach, got a hit, came over like he hadn't missed a beat.
Yeah.
He must have been in his late 30s, maybe even early. I don't know how old he was by then.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I talked to a Wisconsin baseball player. I'm a retired optometrist, and maybe about 30 years ago, Ryan Duran came in for an eye exam, and we talked about baseball quite a bit. Now, the interesting thing about that for me was when I examined his eyes, he was moderately nearsighted. If you read books, it sounds like he's just terribly nearsighted, so that
The legend was he couldn't see.
Yeah.
Yep, so that the batters actually feared the ball coming right through the batter's box. But he was only nearsighted by a moderate amount, and I don't think it really affected him. It's just the reputation that he had.
It's a
Wow.
great play on his part.
Great
well done.
story.
Well, yeah. I mean, wouldn't some of that be deliberate? Like if you had his skill
Yeah.
in that, wouldn't you make sure to throw a couple of wild ones just to keep the batters honest? Like,
Oh, absolutely, I would.
Yeah,
Because
like-
you see a couple of balls like that coming through the batter's box, that doesn't boost your confidence at all.
yeah.
in like
Did you
2000
ask him why he had those big glasses?
No, I didn't. But you see, at certain times, frames are especially big. Now these days, a big frame is real popular, where 3 years ago it wasn't. And the bigger the frame, when you're nearsighted, the thicker the lenses have to be on the edge. So, if a person's nearsighted with a big frame, it looks worse. And by the way, I've got a question about something that came up before, talking about the Oakland Athletics, and it was mentioned that they moved 3 times. Well, when I look at Oakland's attendance and the Athletics attendance through the years, did they actually have times when the attendance was really good? It seems to me that for so much of that franchise's history, they had kind of mediocre or poor attendance. When was it really good?
Late 80s.
Yeah. Even in the 70s, when they were winning their 3 championships, their attendance was not very. It was decent, but it was nothing like you would think.
Yeah,
broke-
it wasn't good, but it was average. It wasn't bad.
Yeah, but
They broke a
3-time
million
champions
fans
be
only
better than
twice
average,
during
right?
that stretch.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
1973 and 1975.
Mhm.
Let's look it up.
But, now, Dennis, when you were talking about the Wisconsin players, when they had the All-American Girls Professional League players at the convention, were they from Wisconsin?
Bob, you might know some. I know that some of them I know. Mary was.
Some of them.
Jim Nitz helped arrange that. Bob, do you remember? I don't think they were all. Someone might, like one of them could have been from like Rockford, that area.
I think it would have been about half and half.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
The main one was probably Jackie Matson-Baumgart. She was real involved in that stuff. I bet she was probably, I wasn't there, but she was probably involved. She was originally from Waukegan, but she ended up in Milwaukee. She lived with an aunt and stayed in Milwaukee until she passed away.
Yeah. And I know most of them are now passed. Tony's around, but at that time she didn't know about us and the movie or anything at that point. So yeah.
You know, I was hoping someone would have said they got to know Joe Hauser in Sheboygan.
I met him one time.
Did you?
He was signing autographs at Southridge Shopping Center. And it was a Saturday afternoon and there weren't many people around him. Nobody with him from whatever sponsored group there was, just this old man sitting by himself. And I had read that he would be there. That's the only reason I knew.
Wow.
And I talked to him for probably 15 minutes.
Gee.
There was nothing else going on.
Yeah.
He signed a copy of my book. And I would estimate it took him about 2 minutes to sign it.
Wow.
I now have the same problem, so I can appreciate that. Yeah, very nice man. Pretty sharp, pretty good memory. But he was at least 90 at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, he lived in, I want to say his upper 90s, but he was second to Babe Ruth in home runs in 1924. And he was the last living ball player to play against shoeless Joe Jackson and the Black Sox. So when he was a Milwaukee Brewer.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
1920, springtime. Sharp as a tack, too. Sharper than Dennis, I'd have to say. Okay, maybe not that sharp.
I'd say so. Anything else, guys?
Any other ball players from Wisconsin? Anybody interview?
How about Ray Barris, the pitching coach of the White Sox?
There's a good one.
Oh, that's
Twin Falls, sharp guy. He's the guy that recommended that Tommy John go out to LA to talk to this Dr. Job.
Advice.
And he did.
Bob Beege, you've talked to quite a few ball players in your in some of the writing you have done with your books.
I'm trying to think of some of the Wisconsin people. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on who was born in Wisconsin.
Don Pavletic.
Yeah.
Johnny Smith in Wausau?
Yes. Never met him.
Yeah.
What was he called? Bigfoot or?
Oh, Pete. Big.
Yeah. You mentioned Ryan Dern and the eyes. He came up to Madison early 2000, the college development team there to Mallards. I was a host family team historian back in the early 2000s when they started up. And he came up to throw out the first pitch and threw it to the backstop, the old sticky. Yeah, so he was still doing that, in 2002, 2003, I think he was probably when he was there.
Probably a decade or more, Ryan Duran was honored at a banquet of the Wisconsin Old Time Ball Players Association. And the way those things work, they induct about 5 or 6 people on that day. And he was one of them. And customarily, each talks for about 5 minutes, says that he's happy to see everybody and so forth. Ryan Duran talked for almost an hour. It's still legendary whenever our organization has a banquet. He just wouldn't stop. And I guess he wasn't that interesting.
I just thought I'd dig this out. Ryan Duran actually was at the SABR convention, if I can get this right, in Denver in 2003. Well, I can't get this clear. You can see his frames of his glasses aren't very thick. He wasn't really at the convention. Oddly enough, I talked with him. Of course, that's my ugly face with him. And of all places, given his recovery from alcoholism, we were talking in the bar. He was not drinking. He had cleaned up by then, and everything was fine in his life. Very pleasant. I just can't get this thing exactly right, but had a nice conversation with him and a few other people. He was in the hotel rather than at the convention, and then just when he found out there was a baseball convention coming on, he was glad to talk to people.
But Ryan,
Did you recognize him?
No, I didn't. I wouldn't have known who he was, but somebody told me it was Ryan. I guess I was with a group of 3 or 4 other people, I believe, at the time, and somebody, I found out it was Ron Duran, so we started talking. I wasn't the only one he was talking to. It wasn't a big group, but as I recall, just maybe 3 or 4 SABR members and him. But he spent quite a bit of time, just very pleasant conversation. And of course, he was. I did find it ironical because he had a great recovery from alcoholism before that, and we were in a kind of a slash bar restaurant in the hotel there in Denver.
Jim, to go back to your questions about Wisconsin ball players, one of the things I started in February is doing a small blurb each month on all the Wisconsin-born ball players each month. There's 245 of them. And then as this went on, I started doing more and more research. So it was in May, I haven't finished May. I got the Bert Thiel on May 4th. I saw there was 2 articles on this 94-year-old guy written in April of this year. One was a Boston Globe article about him being one of the 2 remaining Boston Braves, and a member from Mississippi, Tom Van Heining, who wrote a really good start, half a bio for Baseball 101. So the Spanish baseball website, he does the English language articles for him. And so when I saw he was a SABR member, I reached out to him to see if he was going to do a bio. He said, hey, do you want to help me on it? So for the next, we had about a 2.5 week real intense time working on getting that bio done because he was going back to work. And then right after that, I decided to sell the house. So I have not done any baseball research, and I'm almost going crazy because I haven't done any since then. All I've done is move boxes. But my goal is to get enough of these bios started with some good information on these ball players to get it out to the membership, just like the Iowa chapter is asking the membership to get out there and let's do bio projects on all the ball players born in Iowa. I think we should do that in Wisconsin. Some are dead, we'll never get to them, but there's a number still alive. And I think that would be an interesting project for the chapter. I know Bob Beege, we tried doing that with the Portrait Field book, and you wrote a great book because we couldn't get the chapter involved, but I just think it would be a good way to get to know Wisconsin players.
Oh, that's a great idea. Dennis.
Stu Thornley did a project like that with the Minnesota players about 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Did a nice job. He had some Negro League players and some All-American professional girls league players as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at so far from the Wisconsin-born players, there's only been 1 Negro League player, a couple American League. I've only gone through 4 months, so I haven't gone through the whole year. But so I want to get back on that. My goal is to get back in that. Maybe September, I got a project I'm working with for SABR on the Brewers ownership, so they may push my birthday thing back later. But do want to get back to that and start reaching out to the chapter, because I think we've had some really good ball players in the state, and we've had a few guys who, one game and their only appearance was an error in the outfield, didn't get a chance to bat. We've had those types too. But
Dennis, to me, those are the best stories too.
Mm-hmm.
The real small cup of tea, coffee.
They have an interesting story around their career. They really were very, very good in the minor leagues. It just, Bert Thiel was a very good pitcher. At that era, there was a lot of really good pitchers, with the only 16 teams. And he didn't get a good opportunity. They had him as relief, and he was a starter. And he won 148 games in the minors.
I've got another word about Joe Hauser. I went to a convention, a SABR convention during the 1980s in Minneapolis, and Joe Hauser was there. He was one of the speakers, and the group of SABR fans with Joe Hauser in it were sitting at a game in the Metrodome where Minnesota was playing, and as a tribute to Joe Hauser, they put a big tribute up on the scoreboard for him, because of course he hit a lot of home runs for them, and so the fans cheered, and it was nice to see him get that ovation. And I even talked to him briefly about Connie Mack. So that's my touch with greatness.
Oh, wow. Now that's neat. Now that is neat. So you met someone that played against Ruth and Gehrig? It's amazing. Yep. Yeah. And Shoeless Joe. We took Joe to a bar and a restaurant one night. He's probably 95. And when we took him out of the nursing home, the nurse really glared at us and was almost yelling at us. She was saying, "Don't you take him to a bar, and if you're at a restaurant, don't let him get anything to drink." I think he had like 4 shots at the first bar we went to.
Well, he is from Wisconsin, and we do a lot of business in bars. We do have a drinking tradition here. So the fact that Ryan Dern was in a bar, he didn't have to drink. It's the bar is a site that, there's a lot of family traditions in bars. So.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, folks? We're at about 6:15. If not, Max, thank you. This was very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Max.
Jay, I hope you appreciate the book. I'm thinking of ordering 2, but I'm not sure I want to add another book to my pile quite yet. But Jay, I will get your book ordered in the mail the next day or 2 from probably either Amazon or SABR, get it out to you. So congratulations. Any final words of wisdom for us, Max?
You almost took them out of my mouth. Is that if anybody's interested in ordering a copy, the SABR website has it. Amazon.com has it. And although this won't be of help to most of the people here, the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, I think, has copies of it as well. And if you're a SABR member, if you order it from the SABR website, you get a 50% discount.
Yeah. Sorry. So.
Where's the Canadian Hall of Fame?
St. Mary's, Ontario.
Okay, thanks.
It's, do you know the geography of Ontario very well?
Oh, yeah.
It's between Stratford and London.
Okay.
I thought London was in England.
It's there as well.
So is Stratford.
Yeah,
that's true.
Both Londons are on the Thames. Both Stratfords are on the Avon.
Yeah.
And so the reason why it was built there was the first recorded baseball game in Canada was played at a town called Beachville, Ontario, which no longer exists. And the closest existing town to Beachville was St. Mary's.
Wow.
Sounds like the Cooperstown legend, doesn't it?
Only it's not
Almost.
a legend.
Yeah.
Well,
Whether a baseball game was actually played in Cooperstown and whether it was played at that time is up for debate. It may have just been a Civil War legend,
right?
Given Abner Doubleday's stature in the Union Army.
Yeah.
Right.
Did Abner Double A play in Abner Double A? Yeah.
Abner Double A, yeah.
Double A, yeah.
Up in Beachville? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he was there. He was there with the Seward's Follies. 54-40 fight.
Oh, God. Thank you, everybody. Watch for the next newsletter, our next speaker. I'm always looking for ideas for speakers, topics, things to do. Max, thanks for volunteering. As soon as I
How
saw
about front row Amy?
Where are we?
Front row Amy.
Uh,
She can't go to games.
yeah, well, none of us are going to games.
Right.
No.
Might be, to me, she's probably an interesting person that we need to know more about.
Yeah. Well, Mike, work on it.
Okay.
Okay. So, but any and other topics or ideas also, if you have something you'd like to submit to the newsletter, please do. It's the purpose of the newsletter is for us to share information. So So if anybody would like to do that, please do. But with that, I will say good night and thank you again for attending.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Dennis. Thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
See you
everybody.
Sunday, Max.
Bye.